Black woman accused of causing turbulence. Her shocking response changes everything in seconds. On an ordinary flight, a storm was brewing, not in the skies, but in the hearts of those on board. A woman, quiet and dignified, becomes the center of unwarranted accusations. Her crime? Simply existing where others believed she didn't belong. What unfolds next exposes the deep cracks in a system built on prejudice. But here's the twist. This woman isn't just any passenger. She's someone who holds the power to change everything. Before we begin, where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. If you love inspiring stories of resilience and justice, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Your support helps us share these impactful stories with even more people. Now let's get into it. The hum of the engines filled the cabin as passengers settled into their seats, some flipping through magazines while others scrolled on their phones. Angela Hamilton sat in first class, her leather-bound journal open in her lap, pen poised over a fresh page. She loved the serenity of flights, the rare hours where no one could call, no one could email, and the world seemed to pause above the clouds. Today, however, the peace she sought felt elusive. From the corner of her eye, Angela noticed the flight attendant, a slim woman with sharp, calculating eyes, casting glances her way. Angela dismissed it at first. She was used to being watched, especially when occupying spaces people like her were rarely expected to belong. First class was no exception. As the plane ascended, mild turbulence began to rattle the overhead compartments. Angela tucked her pen into the journal's spine and gripped the armrests lightly. She noticed a few other passengers shift uncomfortably, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Turbulence was a common occurrence. At least that's what she told herself. The first real sign of trouble came when the flight attendant returned, her smile tight and forced. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her voice saccharine yet condescending. "Is everything all right?" Angela blinked, confused. "Yes, why do you ask?" The flight attendant's gaze flicked over Angela's tailored suit and the expensive watch on her wrist before settling on her face. "You seemed uneasy, just checking if you're comfortable." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but heavy. Angela had encountered this tone before, the thinly veiled suggestion that her presence was somehow unsettling. She smiled politely, a mask she had perfected over years of navigating these moments. "I'm perfectly fine, thank you." The woman hesitated, as if searching for a flaw in Angela's response, before retreating to the galley. Angela turned back to her journal, but the tension lingered, coiling in her chest like a spring. Minutes later, the turbulence grew stronger. The cabin lights flickered briefly, and a few passengers gasped. Angela remained calm, accustomed to the unpredictable nature of flying. Yet from the front of the cabin, she noticed the flight attendant speaking hurriedly to the pilot, who had cracked the cockpit door open. Her instincts prickled. The turbulence subsided as quickly as it began, and the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, apologies for the rough air. We've adjusted our altitude and the rest of the flight should be smooth." Relieved murmurs rippled through the cabin. Angela resumed her writing, determined to brush off the earlier oddities, but her tranquility was shattered moments later when the cockpit door opened fully, and the pilot himself strode into the cabin. His eyes scanned the rows until they landed on her. "You," he said, pointing directly at Angela. She froze, stunned. "Excuse me?" "You've been causing disruptions," he continued, his voice loud enough to turn every head in first class. "Your behavior is making other passengers uncomfortable." Angela's stomach dropped. The weight of all eyes in the cabin pressed down on her, suffocating. "I don't understand," she said carefully. "I haven't done anything." The pilot crossed his arms, his stance exuding authority. "We've received complaints about your aggressive demeanor." The absurdity of the accusation left her momentarily speechless. Aggressive. She had barely spoken a word since boarding. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Angela said, keeping her tone measured. "I've been sitting here quietly." A murmur swept through the cabin, passengers whispering to one another. Some looked at Angela with curiosity, others with suspicion. Her chest tightened. She had worked her entire life to rise above the stereotypes that followed her like shadows. Yet here she was, being reduced to one in front of a captive audience. "Ma'am," the pilot said, his voice hardening, "if you can't comply, I'll have to move you to a different seat. For everyone's safety." Safety. The word cut through her like a blade, loaded with unspoken prejudice. Angela squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm not moving," she said firmly. "I paid for this seat just like everyone else." The pilot's jaw tightened, his face reddening. "If you refuse to cooperate, I'll have no choice but to involve security when we land." Angela's hands trembled, but she refused to let them see her falter. "Do what you need to do," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The pilot glared at her for a moment longer before turning on his heel and retreating to the cockpit. The flight attendant lingered briefly, her lips twitching into a smirk before following him. Angela sank back into her seat, her heart pounding. Around her, the whispers grew louder, the weight of judgment from her fellow passengers pressing down on her like a physical force. She closed her journal, no longer able to focus. The rest of the flight stretched ahead, an unbearable eternity. As the plane flew on, Angela stared out the window, the clouds below a stark reminder of her isolation. She had faced moments like this before, but this felt different, sharper, crueler. She didn't know it yet, but the turbulence in her heart was about to ignite a storm far greater than anyone on that flight could imagine. The minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Angela kept her gaze fixed out the window, watching the endless expanse of clouds, but her reflection stared back at her in the glass, a mask of calm that barely concealed the fire building within. Her fingers tightened around the armrests, knuckles whitening as she fought to maintain composure. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder, like the faint buzzing of a swarm, impossible to ignore. Angela's ears picked up fragments of conversations, speculative whispers, disapproving tones, and even an outright chuckle from a row behind her. "Must have done something to upset them," a man muttered to his seatmate. "Can you believe the nerve?" came a woman's reply. "First class isn't for everyone." Angela's stomach churned. She wanted to turn around, to confront them, but she knew better. Any move she made would be scrutinized, twisted to fit the narrative already forming in their minds. The narrative of an aggressive black woman who didn't belong. Her journal lay closed in her lap, the gold-embossed initials on the cover catching the light. It had been a gift to herself when she signed her first major business deal, her way of celebrating hard-earned success. Now, it sat untouched, a stark reminder of how quickly accomplishments could be erased in the eyes of others. The flight attendant reappeared, her steps brisk and deliberate as she moved through the aisle. She didn't stop to address Angela this time, but the look she cast in her direction was enough. A fleeting glance filled with disdain. Angela felt her pulse quicken, her frustration bubbling closer to the surface. She glanced around the cabin, searching for an ally, but the other passengers avoided her gaze. Even those who seemed uncomfortable with the situation kept their eyes on their screens or newspapers, unwilling to intervene. The silence of complicity felt like a physical force pressing against her chest. The turbulence had subsided completely by now, and the captain's voice came over the intercom once more, his tone steady and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached cruising altitude. We'll begin beverage service shortly. Thank you for your patience." Angela scoffed quietly. Patience. She wondered how much patience they expected her to have while enduring this baseless humiliation. She shifted in her seat, attempting to find a more comfortable position, but the tension in her body refused to dissipate. The flight attendant returned with the drink cart, her cheerful demeanor directed at everyone except Angela. She handed out glasses of wine and sparkling water with exaggerated politeness, exchanging small talk with passengers as though nothing had happened. When she reached Angela's row, her expression turned cold. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked, her voice devoid of the warmth she'd shown the others. Angela paused, considering her response. She wanted to refuse out of spite, but she also didn't want to give them any more ammunition. "Just water, please," she said, her voice clipped. The flight attendant poured the water and placed it on Angela's tray table with a sharp clink. Without another word, she moved on to the next passenger, resuming her friendly chatter as though Angela didn't exist. Angela took a sip, the cool liquid doing little to soothe the heat rising in her chest. She leaned back, closing her eyes, and tried to steady her breathing. She replayed the events in her mind, dissecting every detail, searching for a reason, any reason why she had been singled out. But no matter how she looked at it, the answer was painfully clear. This wasn't about her behavior. It was about her presence. Hours passed in strained silence, broken only by the occasional announcement from the cockpit or the rustle of movement around her. Angela's mind wandered to the life she had built, a life filled with obstacles she had overcome through sheer determination. She thought of the late nights, the sacrifices, the moments of doubt when she had questioned whether it was all worth it. And now, here she was, being reduced to a stereotype by people who knew nothing about her. The plane began its descent, and Angela felt a flicker of relief. Soon this ordeal would be over. She could step off this aircraft, leave behind the suffocating atmosphere, and regain some semblance of control. But even as the thought crossed her mind, she knew it wasn't that simple. This wasn't just about her. It was about every other person who had been subjected to the same kind of treatment, the same quiet indignities that piled up like weights on their shoulders. The wheels touched down with a jarring thud, and the passengers stirred, gathering their belongings. Angela stayed seated, her movements deliberate as she tucked her journal into her bag and retrieved her coat from the overhead compartment. She didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her rush or flustered. As she stepped into the aisle, she noticed the pilot standing near the exit, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. The flight attendant stood beside him, her smile fixed in place. Angela walked past them without a word, her head held high, though her heart hammered in her chest. "Ma'am," the pilot called after her, his tone laced with condescension. "I hope you understand we were just following protocol." Angela stopped in her tracks. For a moment she considered responding, letting him know exactly what she thought of his so-called protocol. But she decided against it. This wasn't the time. Not yet. She turned her head slightly, just enough to meet his gaze. "You'll be hearing from me," she said, her voice calm but firm. The pilot smirked as though he didn't take her seriously. Angela said nothing more, stepping off the plane and into the terminal. The cool air hit her face, and for the first time in hours, she felt a sense of freedom. But the fire inside her still burned, hotter than ever. She pulled out her phone and made a call. "It's me," she said when the line connected. "We need to talk. Something happened on my flight." The voice on the other end was reassuring, steady. "What do you need?" Angela paused, her eyes scanning the bustling terminal. "I need to remind them who they're dealing with." Angela stood in the terminal, her phone still pressed to her ear. The voices of travelers swirled around her, an indistinct hum of announcements, hurried footsteps, and occasional laughter. Yet, she was acutely aware of the calm determination in her own voice as she explained the situation to the person on the other end of the line. "I'll send you all the details," she said, her tone measured but firm. "This isn't just about me. It's about the way people like me are treated, dismissed, humiliated, and silenced. I want action." The voice on the line, belonging to her trusted assistant Monica, responded with equal resolve. "Understood, Miss Hamilton. I'll schedule the necessary meetings and start gathering the documentation." Angela ended the call and slipped her phone into her bag. She allowed herself a deep breath, the cool air of the terminal grounding her. The events on the plane replayed in her mind with vivid clarity, each moment etched into her memory. The accusatory glares, the muttered judgments, the pilot's dismissive tone. It wasn't the first time she had faced prejudice, but it might have been the most blatant. She adjusted her coat and began walking toward the airport lounge, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Heads turned as she passed, some passengers recognizing her, though they couldn't quite place where they'd seen her before. Angela had grown used to the subtle attention her presence commanded. But today, it felt different. Today, it felt like a reminder of the work still left to do. The lounge was a world apart from the bustling terminal, an oasis of quiet luxury. Plush chairs, dim lighting, and soft music created an atmosphere of exclusivity. Angela approached the reception desk where a young attendant greeted her with a polished smile. "Good afternoon, Miss Hamilton. Your suite is ready." Angela nodded her thanks and followed the attendant to a private area, her movements composed yet purposeful. The suite was a small, elegantly appointed space with a desk, a sofa, and a view of the tarmac. Angela set her bag down and sat at the desk, her hands smoothing over the polished wood surface. She opened her journal, flipping to a fresh page. Writing had always been her way of processing, turning chaos into clarity. She began jotting down her thoughts, each word deliberate. Flight 237. Incident with pilot and crew. False accusations rooted in prejudice. Plan. Address the issue publicly but constructively. Leverage my position. Objective. Change, not revenge. Create policies to prevent this from happening to others. Her pen paused, hovering above the paper. She had always believed in using her influence for good, but this incident had ignited something deeper, a need to confront not just the individuals responsible, but the system that enabled them. As she wrote, there was a knock at the door. Angela glanced up. "Come in." The door opened and Monica stepped inside, a tablet in one hand and a folder in the other. Monica was in her early 30s, with a sharp mind and an unwavering loyalty to Angela. She was more than an assistant. She was a confidant and ally. "I came as soon as I could," Monica said, setting the tablet and folder on the desk. "I've started compiling the reports you'll need. There's already some chatter online about the incident. A few passengers seem to have posted videos." Angela raised an eyebrow. "Videos?" Monica nodded. "One of them captured the pilot confronting you. It's already gaining traction on social media." Angela leaned back in her chair, considering this new development. She had always been cautious about the power of social media. It could amplify a message, but it could also distort it. Still, this could work in her favor if handled correctly. "I want a statement prepared," Angela said. "Something measured but firm. This isn't just about one flight or one pilot. It's about changing the culture." Monica scribbled notes on her tablet. "Understood. I'll draft something and have it ready for your approval. In the meantime, I've also contacted the CEO's office. They're willing to meet with you today." Angela's lips curved into a small smile. "Good. Let's make sure they understand the gravity of the situation." The hours leading up to the meeting passed in a blur of preparation. Angela reviewed her notes, ensuring every detail of the incident was documented. She rewatched the video clips Monica had mentioned, her anger simmering as she saw the pilot's accusatory stance and the way the flight attendant smirked in the background. But she channeled that anger into focus, knowing that emotions alone wouldn't achieve the change she sought. When the time came, Angela stood in front of the mirror in the suite's restroom, adjusting her blazer. The reflection staring back at her was one of poise and confidence, but beneath it lay a storm of determination. She had faced boardrooms filled with skeptical men, negotiated deals under impossible conditions, and built an empire from the ground up. She would not let a pilot with a fragile ego and a bias against her skin color shake her resolve. "Let's do this," she said to herself, her voice steady. Angela walked into the meeting room with Monica by her side, her presence commanding attention. Seated at the table was the airline's CEO, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a polished demeanor. Beside him was the head of customer relations, a woman who looked equally uncomfortable and eager to please. "Miss Hamilton," the CEO said, standing to shake her hand. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with us. I want to assure you that we take this matter very seriously." Angela returned the handshake, her grip firm. "I appreciate that," she said, taking a seat. "But I'm not here for apologies. I'm here for accountability and change." The CEO's smile faltered slightly, but he nodded. "Of course. Please tell us how we can address this." Angela placed her journal on the table, the gold-embossed initials catching the light. "Let's start with the incident itself," she said, "and then we'll discuss how to ensure nothing like it happens again." Her voice was calm, but her resolve was unyielding. The conversation ahead would be long, and the fight for justice would be even longer. But Angela was ready. This was not just about her. It was about every person who had ever been made to feel less than simply because of who they were. And Angela Hamilton was not the kind of woman to back down. Angela sat across from the airline CEO, her fingers laced neatly on the table. She radiated a composed authority that demanded respect, a quiet but unmistakable power honed from years of experience. The CEO, David Morgan, shifted slightly in his seat, his polished smile betraying a trace of unease under her steady gaze. Beside him, the head of customer relations, a woman named Evelyn Pierce, fidgeted with her pen, scribbling notes on a legal pad in bursts of nervous energy. Angela didn't rush into the conversation. She let the silence settle, the weight of the moment sinking into the room like a dense fog. When she finally spoke, her words were deliberate and sharp, like a scalpel cutting through the air. "Before we discuss solutions," she began, her voice even, "I want to understand how we got here. I want to know why a paying passenger, one who complied with all the rules, was humiliated in front of an entire cabin based on nothing more than baseless accusations." David cleared his throat, straightening his posture as if preparing for a rebuttal. "Miss Hamilton, let me start by saying that we deeply regret how the situation unfolded. Our staff is trained to prioritize safety, and in this case it seems there was a misjudgment." "A misjudgment?" Angela's eyebrow arched slightly. "That's an interesting way to frame it. What exactly was being judged? My presence in first class? My demeanor? Or was it simply the color of my skin?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Evelyn's pen froze mid-scribble, and David's polished facade cracked for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "I can assure you, Miss Hamilton, that our policies are designed to ensure all passengers are treated fairly." Angela leaned forward slightly, her piercing gaze never wavering. "If that were true, we wouldn't be sitting here. Fairness isn't just a policy written in a manual. It's reflected in actions, in decisions. What happened to me wasn't an isolated misjudgment. It was a reflection of a culture that tolerates bias." David's lips pressed into a thin line. "We're committed to addressing these concerns. That's why we're here, to listen and take action." Angela gave a small, measured nod. "Good. Then let's start with the facts." She reached into her bag and pulled out the folder Monica had prepared. Sliding it across the table, she watched as David opened it, revealing the printed screenshots of the videos passengers had uploaded. Angela had reviewed them thoroughly, each frame a stark reminder of the humiliation she endured. David's expression tightened as he scanned the images. One photo showed the pilot towering over Angela, pointing a finger as other passengers stared, their faces a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Another showed the flight attendant standing nearby, her smirk unmistakable. Evelyn broke the silence, her voice cautious. "Miss Hamilton, we're aware of these videos. They've prompted a lot of public interest, and we're taking steps to manage the fallout." Angela tilted her head slightly. "Fallout? This isn't just about public perception, Miss Pierce. This is about accountability. Let me ask you, how many other passengers, particularly passengers of color, have faced similar treatment without the privilege of being heard?" Evelyn glanced at David, who shifted uncomfortably. I don't have those figures, but that's exactly the problem." Angela interrupted, her tone sharp but controlled. "You don't have the figures because no one's been looking, and without looking, you can't fix it." David exhaled deeply, leaning back in his chair. "What do you propose, Miss Hamilton? What changes do you believe are necessary?" Angela paused, collecting her thoughts. She wasn't here for retribution. She was here for transformation. Her goal was not just to hold the airline accountable, but to use this moment as a catalyst for systemic change. First, she began, her voice steady, I want a full review of the airline's training programs. That includes sensitivity training, implicit bias training, and customer service protocols. Your staff needs to understand how their actions and inactions impact passengers. David nodded slowly. That's reasonable. We can start reviewing those materials immediately. Second, Angela continued, I want a dedicated diversity and inclusion officer to oversee these programs and ensure they're not just lip service. Someone who reports directly to you, Mr. Morgan. David's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. All right. Third, Angela said, her voice hardening, I want consequences. The individuals involved in this incident, the pilot, the flight attendant, should face disciplinary action, not as a scapegoat, but as a message that this behavior is unacceptable. Evelyn interjected hesitantly. Miss Hamilton, we do have processes for addressing employee conduct, and how often do those processes result in meaningful change? Angela's tone was sharp, cutting through Evelyn's excuse. This isn't just about what happened to me. It's about setting a standard for how all passengers should be treated. The room fell silent again, the weight of Angela's words pressing against the walls. David exchanged a glance with Evelyn, then leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table. You've made your point, Miss Hamilton, he said. We'll implement your recommendations and I'll personally oversee the review process. I hope this demonstrates our commitment to making things right. Angela studied him, her expression unreadable. She had dealt with men like David before, men who made promises in the heat of the moment, only to backtrack when the spotlight dimmed. But she wasn't here to rely on promises. Your commitment is appreciated, she said finally, but I'm not just trusting words. I'll be following up to ensure these changes happen and happen quickly. David nodded, his expression solemn. Understood. Angela rose from her seat, extending a hand. David stood to shake it, his grip firm but slightly hesitant. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, Miss Hamilton. We'll make this right. As Angela walked out of the room, Monica trailing behind her, she felt a small sense of satisfaction. The meeting was just the beginning, but it was a step forward, a step toward accountability, toward justice. The fire inside her had not dimmed. If anything, it burned brighter. She knew this fight was far from over, but Angela Hamilton had never been one to back down. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the airport's towering glass windows as Angela and Monica walked briskly away from the conference room. Each step felt purposeful, carrying the weight of decisions made and battles yet to come. Angela's heels clicked against the polished floor, echoing faintly in the cavernous terminal. Monica matched her pace, her tablet clutched tightly against her chest. Do you think they'll follow through? Monica asked after a long stretch of silence. Angela's expression remained unreadable, her gaze fixed ahead. I don't think they have a choice. The videos are already out there. This isn't something they can sweep under the rug. Monica nodded but looked unconvinced. Even so, promises are one thing, action is another. Angela paused mid-stride, turning to face her assistant. That's why we'll make sure they don't forget. Follow up with our legal team. I want a formal statement outlining the airline's commitments and a timeline for implementation. Monica jotted down a note on her tablet. Got it. Anything else? Angela exhaled deeply, her shoulders relaxing just slightly. Yes. Let's not lose sight of the bigger picture. This isn't just about fixing what happened to me. It's about creating lasting change. Start drafting a proposal for a broader initiative, something we can present not just to this airline but across the industry. Monica's eyes lit up. An industry-wide reform? That's ambitious. Angela allowed herself a small smile. Ambition is what got us here, isn't it? As they reached the lounge where Angela had reserved a private space, the tension in her chest began to loosen. The suite was as she'd left it, serene, orderly, and a stark contrast to the chaos of the last 24 hours. Angela removed her coat, draping it carefully over the back of a chair, and sank into the plush sofa. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment, allowing herself a rare moment of vulnerability. The memories of the flight replayed in her mind, unbidden and vivid. The pilot's accusatory tone, the flight attendant's smirk, the whispers of the other passengers. All of it felt like a weight she couldn't quite shake. She had learned to armor herself against such moments, but every armor had cracks, and this incident had found them. "Angela?" Monica's voice was soft, almost hesitant. Angela opened her eyes, glancing at her assistant. "Yes?" "There's something you should see." Monica handed over her tablet, the screen already loaded with a video. "One of the passengers posted this just a few minutes ago. It's starting to gain traction." Angela took the tablet, her brow furrowing as she hit play. The video showed the confrontation on the plane, the pilot standing over her with an air of authority, his voice raised just enough to carry across the cabin. The camera caught the expressions of the surrounding passengers, some curious, others indifferent, a few openly judging. But it also captured Angela. Her calm demeanor, her measured responses, her refusal to yield. Watching herself, Angela felt a mixture of emotions, pride at how she'd handled the situation, but also a deep-seated frustration that she had to endure it in the first place. The video ended with murmurs from the passengers and the clip abruptly cut off. Below it, the comments section was already filling up. "Unbelievable. She didn't do anything wrong, and they treated her like a criminal. This is why we need better training for airline staff. Imagine paying for first class and being treated like this. Disgusting." Angela handed the tablet back to Monica, her expression thoughtful. "It's good that people are talking about this," she said, "but we need to control the narrative. The focus shouldn't just be on my experience. It should be on the systemic issues this highlights." Monica nodded, already typing furiously. "I'll work on a draft statement for social media, something that emphasizes change rather than just outrage." "Good," Angela said. "And reach out to the passenger who recorded this. I want to thank them personally. Their courage in speaking out matters." Hours passed as Angela worked in the quiet solitude of the suite. Her laptop screen was filled with documents, emails, and drafts as she meticulously outlined her plans. Every word she typed felt like a step forward, a way to channel her anger into something productive. Monica came and went, bringing updates, coffee, and the occasional question. As evening fell, the terminal outside grew quieter, the hustle and bustle of the day giving way to a more subdued rhythm. Angela stood by the window, looking out at the tarmac, where planes were being prepped for their next journeys. The scene was strangely calming, a reminder of the vast network of connections that spanned the world. Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking her reverie. She picked it up and saw a familiar name on the screen. Her mentor, Evelyn Reed, a retired businesswoman who had guided Angela through some of the toughest years of her career. Angela answered, her voice softening. "Evelyn, it's good to hear from you." "I saw the video," Evelyn said without preamble. Her voice, though older, carried the same strength Angela had always admired. "How are you holding up?" Angela hesitated. "I'm managing. It's been a lot." "I can imagine," Evelyn said. "But you handled yourself with grace as always. I just called to remind you of something you already know. You have more power than they realize. Use it wisely." Angela smiled faintly, the words sinking in. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." "Any time," Evelyn said. "And Angela?" "Yes?" "Don't let them off easy." Angela chuckled softly. "I wasn't planning to." As she ended the call, Angela felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fire inside her had been stoked once again, burning brighter with each passing moment. She turned back to her desk, her mind already racing with the next steps. This fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, and Angela Hamilton was just getting started. The dawn light crept through the edges of the curtains in Angela's suite, casting faint streaks of gold across the room. She was already awake, seated at the desk where her journal and laptop lay open. A steaming cup of black coffee sat beside her, untouched. The night had been restless, her thoughts a carousel of strategy and memory, each turn bringing another layer of clarity to her plan. Monica arrived just as the sun fully broke over the horizon, her presence announced by a light knock. She stepped in, tablet in hand, her expression a mix of fatigue and determination. "Morning," she said, offering a small smile. "I've got updates." Angela nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "Let's hear them." Monica took the seat across from her, pulling up a document on her screen. "The video has gone viral, over 2 million views since last night. Comments are overwhelmingly supportive. People are calling it a clear example of systemic bias." Angela raised an eyebrow. "And the airline? What's their response?" "They've issued a generic apology on their social media accounts," Monica said, her tone flat. She passed the tablet to Angela, showing her the statement. "We are aware of an incident involving one of our passengers and are reviewing the matter thoroughly. We are committed to providing a safe and inclusive environment for all travelers. We apologize for any distress caused and will take appropriate action." Angela scanned the words, her jaw tightening. This reads like they're trying to minimize the issue. No acknowledgement of what actually happened, no specifics. It's a textbook PR move. Monica nodded. "Exactly. They're hoping it'll blow over with a vague apology." Angela set the tablet down and leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "That's not going to happen. Draft a response from my account. Something direct but professional." Monica nodded, already typing. "What tone are you thinking?" "Calm, factual, but unflinching," Angela said. "Something like, 'A generic apology is not accountability. I look forward to seeing real action, not just words from Airline name.'" Monica looked up, a small smirk playing on her lips. "You don't hold back, do you?" Angela returned the smirk, though her eyes remained serious. "Why should I? They didn't hold back when they humiliated me." An hour later, Angela's response was live. The post quickly gained traction, with thousands of comments and shares amplifying her message. She watched the numbers climb in real time, each like and share a small affirmation of the collective outrage her experience had sparked. Her phone buzzed with a call, the screen displaying an unfamiliar number. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "This is Angela Hamilton." "Miss Hamilton, this is Rachel Conrad from the Morning Report. We've been following the story about your experience on Flight 237. Would you be available for an interview?" Angela glanced at Monica, who immediately began jotting notes. "Thank you for reaching out, Rachel. I'll need to discuss with my team before committing to anything." "Of course," Rachel replied. "We'd be happy to accommodate your schedule. Please let us know." Angela ended the call, setting the phone down with a soft sigh. "They're circling like hawks now." Monica looked up from her tablet. "Are you considering it?" "Maybe," Angela said. "But if I do, it has to be on my terms. I won't let them sensationalize this into a personal story. It needs to stay focused on the broader issue." Monica nodded. "Understood. I'll draft some talking points just in case." By midday, the airline had released a follow-up statement, this time more specific. "We sincerely apologize to Miss Angela Hamilton for the events that transpired on Flight 237. We are conducting a full investigation into the actions of our staff and will take corrective measures to ensure such incidents do not occur in the future." Angela read the statement aloud, her tone laced with skepticism. "It's better, but still just damage control. They're reacting to public pressure, not genuine accountability." "True," Monica agreed, "but it does mean they're feeling the heat." Angela leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. "Then we turn up the heat even more. Schedule a meeting with the diversity and inclusion teams of other major airlines. If this industry-wide reform is going to happen, we need allies." Monica's fingers flew across her tablet. "On it. I'll also reach out to advocacy groups, people who've been pushing for these changes long before this incident." "Good," Angela said. And let's start drafting a white paper. I want this to be more than just a social media moment. As the day wore on, Angela allowed herself a brief respite, retreating to a quiet corner of the suite. She sipped her coffee, now lukewarm, and stared out at the bustling tarmac. Planes taxied and took off, their sleek forms disappearing into the clouds. The sight reminded her of the interconnected world she was fighting for, a world where everyone deserved dignity and respect, no matter where they were seated or where they came from. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Evelyn Reed. "Making waves already, I see. Proud of you. Don't let up." Angela smiled faintly, her mentor's words a steadying force. She typed back, "Thank you. This fight is just beginning." And it was true. Angela knew that change, real change, was never easy. It required persistence, strategy, and an unyielding belief in justice. But as she looked out at the endless sky, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The turbulence she had endured was just the beginning of a storm she intended to steer toward progress. The next morning, the air was crisp as Angela stepped out of her car and into the grand lobby of the Stanton Conference Center. The building was a modern marvel, with floor-to-ceiling glass walls and polished marble floors that reflected the soft glow of sunlight filtering through. Angela had chosen this venue deliberately. It was neutral ground, a place of business and collaboration. Today, it would be the site where her plans began to take shape. Monica was already waiting for her inside, standing near the reception desk with her ever-present tablet. She greeted Angela with a nod, her expression professional but tinged with the slightest hint of excitement. "Everything's set," Monica said, falling into step beside Angela as they walked toward the private conference room. The representatives from the airlines and advocacy groups started arriving 20 minutes ago. Angela adjusted the lapel of her blazer, her stride purposeful. "Good. Let's make sure this meeting counts. The last thing we need is a room full of platitudes." Monica smirked. "Knowing you, I doubt that'll be a problem." The conference room was spacious yet intimate, designed for productive discussions. A large oak table dominated the center, surrounded by high-backed chairs. At the head of the table sat Angela's nameplate, simple but commanding. Angela Hamilton, founder and CEO, Hamilton Global Ventures. Representatives from 3 major airlines were already seated, their expressions a mix of curiosity and wariness. Beside them sat leaders from advocacy groups focused on equality and diversity in corporate spaces. These were people Angela had worked with before, individuals she respected for their unrelenting commitment to change. Angela entered the room with a calm confidence, her presence immediately drawing attention. The conversations at the table quieted as she took her seat, Monica slipping into the chair beside her. "Good morning," Angela began, her voice steady but warm. "Thank you all for being here. I know your time is valuable, so I'll get straight to the point." She paused, letting the room settle fully into silence. "We're here because what happened to me on Flight 237 isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a broader issue. A systemic issue rooted in bias, ignorance, and a lack of accountability. This isn't just about one airline or one industry. It's about the standards we set for how we treat people, regardless of their race, gender, or background." As Angela spoke, the room seemed to lean in. Her words were measured but powerful, drawing on her experience not just as a victim, but as a leader who understood the weight of responsibility. She outlined her vision for reform with precision: mandatory training, comprehensive sensitivity and implicit bias training for all airline staff, from executives to frontline workers, data transparency, regular audits to track and report incidents of discrimination or bias within airlines, ensuring accountability. Diversity in leadership, programs to promote diversity within airline leadership, creating decision-makers who reflect the diverse world they serve. Passenger advocacy, a streamlined process for passengers to report incidents, with guarantees that their concerns will be addressed promptly and fairly. Angela's voice never wavered, but she spoke with the quiet intensity of someone who had thought deeply about every word. When she finished, The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her proposal settling over the attendees like a thick blanket. The first to speak was Susan Bradley, the head of an advocacy group Angela had long admired. "Angela," she said, her tone both firm and supportive, "this is an ambitious plan and I commend you for it. But implementation is where good ideas often falter. How do we ensure these airlines don't treat this as just another box to check?" Angela nodded, acknowledging the validity of the question. "By making it unavoidable," she replied. "We'll tie progress to public accountability. Airlines that adopt these reforms will be recognized and celebrated. Those that don't will face public scrutiny. Transparency is our leverage." Another voice spoke up. Greg Williams, a senior executive from one of the airlines. "I agree with the need for change," he said cautiously. "But what about the cost? Training programs, audits, diversity initiatives, they all require resources. And in an industry already facing tight margins." Angela cut him off gently but firmly. "Mr. Williams, what's the cost of doing nothing? How much revenue is lost when passengers boycott your airline after incidents like mine? How much damage is done to your brand when the headlines are about discrimination instead of innovation? Change is an investment, not an expense." The discussion continued, ebbing and flowing with moments of agreement and tension. Angela remained poised, steering the conversation with the skill of a seasoned negotiator. Monica occasionally passed her notes, whispering updates and suggestions, but for the most part, Angela carried the room on her own. By the time the meeting concluded, the room had shifted. The initial wariness of the airline representatives had softened, replaced by a cautious willingness to engage. The advocacy leaders were energized, their ideas finding fertile ground in Angela's proposal. "We'll be following up with detailed action plans," Angela said as the attendees began gathering their belongings. "This is just the beginning. The real work starts now." As the room emptied, Monica turned to Angela with a rare smile. "That was impressive. I think you've got them on board." Angela allowed herself a small nod, though her expression remained thoughtful. "We'll see. Words are easy. Actions are what matter." She glanced at the notes spread out before her, the beginnings of a movement taking shape on the pages. For the first time since the incident, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to acknowledge before. Hope. But Angela knew hope alone wasn't enough. It had to be built, brick by brick, into something unshakable, and she was ready to lay the foundation. The days following the meeting at the Stanton Conference Center were a whirlwind of activity. Angela's proposal for systemic reform had begun to spread beyond the walls of the conference room, carried by word of mouth, media coverage, and the relentless momentum of the viral video from Flight 237. Each day brought a new development, a new challenge, and a new opportunity. Angela sat at her desk in her home office, a minimalist yet elegant space overlooking a garden that always seemed to calm her during moments of chaos. Her laptop screen glowed with a grid of faces, the leaders from the advocacy groups, airline executives, and diversity consultants who had become integral to her initiative. It was their second virtual meeting, this time with a sharper focus on turning ideas into action. "Training is the cornerstone," Angela said, her voice clear and steady. "But it can't exist in a vacuum. The audits, the reporting mechanisms, and the leadership pipelines, all of these have to work together. This isn't about ticking boxes, it's about reshaping the culture." Susan Bradley, the advocacy leader, nodded. "Agreed. But reshaping culture means resistance. We need a strategy for dealing with backlash, internally from staff who might resist change and externally from passengers who feel threatened by progress." Angela's lips pressed into a thoughtful line. "Resistance is inevitable," she acknowledged. "But so is progress. We focus on the data, on measurable outcomes. If we show that these initiatives improve passenger satisfaction, reduce incidents, and strengthen public trust, the resistance will have less ground to stand on." Greg Williams, the airline executive who had been skeptical in the initial meeting, spoke up. "We've started reviewing our internal incident reports," he said, his tone more cooperative than before. "The numbers are sobering. I can't deny the need for change anymore. Angela leaned forward slightly, meeting his gaze through the screen. That's where real leadership begins, Greg. Acknowledging the problem is the first step. Now let's focus on solving it. Later that evening, Angela found herself scrolling through the comments on her social media accounts. Her initial post about the incident on Flight 237 had continued to gain traction, sparking conversations far beyond her usual circles. Amid the outpouring of support were stories, hundreds of them, from people who had faced similar experiences. A young woman described being asked to leave a first-class seat because staff assumed she had boarded the wrong cabin. A Black family recounted being removed from a flight after a minor disagreement with another passenger. Each story added fuel to Angela's determination. One comment caught her eye. "Thank you for speaking up. People like me don't always have the platform to fight back, but you're fighting for all of us." Angela stared at the words for a long moment, feeling their weight. She had always understood the power of representation, but this was something deeper. Her fight had become a symbol for others, a beacon in the storm. The next morning, Angela attended a televised interview with the Morning Report. She had prepared meticulously, knowing the questions would likely veer into personal territory. But she was ready. Her story was a tool now, a means to shed light on a larger issue. The studio was bright and bustling, with crew members adjusting lights and cameras as Angela settled into her seat across from the host, Rachel Conrad. Rachel greeted her warmly, but Angela could sense the underlying seriousness of the interview ahead. "Angela," Rachel began, her tone professional, "your experience on Flight 237 has sparked a national conversation about bias and systemic inequality in the airline industry. How has it felt to see this response?" Angela took a moment to collect her thoughts, her posture poised but relaxed. "It's been overwhelming in many ways," she said, "but it's also been inspiring. This isn't just about me. It's about the countless people who have faced similar treatment and haven't had the opportunity to be heard. Their stories are what drive me." Rachel nodded, her expression empathetic. "Your proposal for reform has been praised by some and criticized by others. What do you say to those who argue that these changes are unnecessary or too costly?" Angela's gaze was steady. "I'd ask them to consider the cost of doing nothing. Discrimination doesn't just hurt individuals. It damages businesses, erodes public trust, and perpetuates inequality. Investing in reform isn't just the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do." After the interview, Angela returned to her office where Monica was waiting with updates. "The interview's already trending," Monica said, showing Angela her phone. "And we've received emails from 3 more airlines expressing interest in joining the initiative." Angela allowed herself a brief smile. "That's good, but we can't lose momentum. Keep pushing the proposal forward, and schedule another meeting with the advocacy leaders. I want to hear their feedback on the next steps." Monica nodded, already taking notes. "On it. Anything else?" Angela glanced at her journal where she had scribbled a new idea earlier that morning. "Yes, let's start planning a summit, an industry-wide event to officially launch the initiative. We'll bring everyone to the table and make this a public commitment." Monica raised an eyebrow. "A summit? That's ambitious." Angela's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with determination. Change always is. That night, as Angela sat by the window of her bedroom watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The journey ahead was daunting, but it was also necessary. She thought of the people who had reached out to her, the stories they had shared, and the hope they had placed in her. Angela closed her eyes, letting the steady rhythm of her breathing anchor her. She had always believed in the power of resilience, in the ability to turn adversity into strength. And now, more than ever, she was determined to use that strength to build something lasting. The storm that began on Flight 237 had grown into a movement, and Angela Hamilton was at its helm. She was ready to navigate the turbulence, to weather the resistance, and to lead others toward a horizon where justice and equality weren't just ideals, but realities. Angela found herself back at the airport one evening, waiting to board a flight for a speaking engagement. As she approached the check-in counter, she noticed a woman in uniform, a flight attendant, watching her with a nervous expression. The woman stepped forward hesitantly. "Miss Hamilton?" she said, her voice tentative. "I just wanted to say thank you. Because of your work, I've learned so much about how my actions can affect others. I'm sorry for what you went through, but I'm grateful for what you've done." Angela's heart swelled with emotion, though she kept her composure. She extended her hand, her smile warm. "Thank you for saying that. Change starts with understanding, and you're part of that change." The attendant nodded, her shoulders relaxing as she stepped aside to let Angela pass. As Angela settled into her first-class seat, she opened her journal, flipping to a blank page. She wrote a single line. Flight 237. The turbulence wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The engines roared to life, and as the plane ascended, Angela looked out at the clouds, a sense of peace washing over her. She had faced the storm, harnessed its power, and turned it into a force for justice. Angela Hamilton wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a pioneer, charting a course toward a better world, and the journey was far from over. And so, what started as an act of injustice became the spark for change. Angela didn't just rise above the prejudice she faced. She turned it into an opportunity to rewrite the rules for everyone. Her story is a powerful reminder that even in the face of adversity, one person's courage can create ripples that inspire transformation. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience, justice, and hope. Together, let's keep these conversations alive. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.